Hi everybody, Jason here. Today we have another episode of Ask Jason. Now if you're new to the channel, Ask Jason is a video series where I answer your questions about spirituality. And today we have a great question from Anna. Now Anna says, "Hi Jason, I have a bad habit of explaining spirituality through the lens of Hollywood. For example, I often find myself comparing the spiritual traditions of Buddhism, Taoism and Hinduism to The Matrix or other clever movies like it. Why is this? And how can I overcome the indoctrination of Hollywood on my mind to see the traditions as they are?" You are not alone here, Anna. This is a common phenomenon people have fallen into in modern culture. Even when I still had a television all the way back in 2008, I realized how much Hollywood affected me on a deep psychological level and how I continually explained a lot of things through Hollywood, especially when I was talking about Eastern spirituality. And as you said with The Matrix, a lot of people explain maybe the teachings of Lao Tzu or the Buddha through the teachings of The Matrix, right? So as I said, you're not alone. And I get a lot of messages a lot by email or maybe in the comments section where people will often relate some teaching I'm explaining to a movie they have watched. We often fall into those traps of explaining things through Hollywood and even Bollywood, right, within India. And so what we need to realize is that Hollywood and even Bollywood are detrimental to our understanding of spirituality. And we need to understand the spiritual traditions through their own teachings, not by filtering them through a lens of modern culture. We have to accept the spiritual traditions as they are and not, get wound up with all of these movies that we've watched and television shows that we've watched. And it's kind of sad in a sense, right? Because our modern culture is based on entertainment as opposed to older cultures, which was based on spirituality. So one had depth and one is very superficial. And there is a lot of problems with Hollywood and even Bollywood that a lot of us don't consider. First of all, if we look at Hollywood and Bollywood, they have a political leaning that is constantly being pushed upon the people. Now, call me old-fashioned, but art should be devoid of ideology. I mean, we do want to dive into deeper topics and deeper understandings of the world through art, but a lot of what has become of Hollywood and Bollywood is pure ideology as opposed to art. And so if you're not someone who resonates with that type of politics, then you'll be influenced by those in California or Mumbai who think that they know best for you. And that's okay for some, but not okay for all, right? So they are not neutral. This is something you need to think about when you think about Hollywood. And this is why I always tell people you need to actually say goodbye to Hollywood. Hollywood nor Bollywood are neutral. And so they will infect your consciousness with what they are trying to promote or their own political leaning and so forth and so on. And this will affect your spirituality and your understanding of the spiritual traditions. Because I can tell you, most of the spiritual traditions of the East don't align with that type of political philosophy that Hollywood and Bollywood are trying to promote. These traditions are ancient and they're based on common sense, on the nature of the universe, on the nature of the self. And so you want to be very careful when you watch a movie or a television series and so forth and so on. This is going to impact your spiritual practice and your spiritual understanding. A lot of people will defend the television shows they watch or the films they watch. But if you are sincere about spirituality and you are a sincere spiritual aspirant, then this is pure distraction. And we've all been there, right? We watch an engaging television show or a movie, and then we unconsciously start thinking about that show and that movie and how it affected us. And we start to think about the next episode, the next television episode. And this is not a good thing for your spiritual practice because you're trying to remain in the present moment and eliminate all of these distractions, not just Hollywood and Bollywood, but distractions in general. They just make up a part of the panorama of distractions that we have to navigate within the modern world. And another problem with Hollywood, which relates to the political leaning, is they are influenced by American problems as opposed to problems in Chad or France or Tasmania and so forth and so on. And so what happens is all of us all around the world begin to watch these films or these television shows, and they are often speaking about American problems that are not our problems. And so what happens then is we take on America's problems as if they are our problems. Now, I can tell you this, that a lot of Americans don't take on the world's problems as their problems because they've got a lot of things to deal with already in their own world, in their own environment. And America need to get their own house in order before they start telling the world how to do things. And so you have to be careful of that as well, because you need to remember that America's problems are not your problems. Though, yes, we should care for every nation in the world, but America's not the only one. It might just be the loudest nation in the world, so people pay the most attention. But I can tell you there are a lot of problems in Nepal, for example, that no one speaks about. There's a lot of problems in the province of Xinjiang in China that no one speaks about for whatever reason. You rarely hear anyone speak about Tibet these days, right? So you don't want to start consuming all of this entertainment and thinking that it's neutral and that you're going to be free of this. You're not going to accumulate any sort of residual karma. This is not true. You will accumulate some residual karma. You will accumulate the problems that these movies are telling you exist, and you will accumulate the political leaning that they are subtly promoting on the world. So you need to be very careful of that. And so this is why, as I said, you need to say goodbye to Hollywood and Bollywood and all of these big entertainment industries, because in some sense, we can say, yes, it is fun to watch a movie and a television show, and there are many good ones out there, but where does it end? You know what I mean? Like we often find ourselves in this cycle of watching movie after movie after movie, television series after television series. You know, in this day and age, they make the television series as good as movies. So you often find people who are flip-flopping between episodes of 4 or 5 different TV series at once, and they think that they are going to be able to advance in their spiritual practice, which it can never happen. It can never happen, because you are going to subtly affect your samskaras, your mental impressions, and your subliminal psychological imprints. And so that is going to affect your vasanas, your habits, just your natural tendencies in life, which will affect your karma, your actions and unconscious actions in the world. Another thing about Hollywood especially is this idea of the superhero or the avatar, so to speak. And this is another reason why we should avoid Hollywood especially, because if we look at Eastern spirituality is about the dissolution of the identity, the dissolution of the self, of the persona system. But within Hollywood, there's this concept always of the superhero or the avatar, so to speak. And I know there's the avatar in the Hindu pantheons, but we need to think about that differently, obviously, within the Hindu tradition. But first, when we look at Hollywood, why do we have the superhero, the avatar, so to speak? It's based on individualism. It's based on Western philosophy, Western psychology, not Eastern psychology or Eastern philosophy. It's based on becoming this great superhero with all of the powers to overcome evil. See, there's the idea of good and evil in Hollywood. And in Eastern spirituality, we are trying to dissolve this illusion of good and evil, because that's a game of partiality based on our own conditioning, our own view of the world. It's not the impartial view of the world. See, in Eastern spirituality, we're trying to get back to the impartial view of the world, to see reality as it truly is. But because of Hollywood, we find, especially in the younger generation, a lot of people want to emulate the superhero. They want to be like Spider-Man or Batman or so forth and so on. And I know there's a whole mythology to a lot of these characters, and there's a whole deeper essence to their psyche and so forth and so on. But they are still portrayed as a superhero overcoming evil, right? We don't find that in the Eastern traditions. Now, a lot of you, as I mentioned, with the avatars in Hinduism, a lot of people will say, what about Arjuna, for example, when he was going to fight his cousins on the battlefield of Kurukshetra in the Bhagavad Gita, in the Mahabharata epic, when Krishna advises Arjuna that he needs to fulfill his dharma. He needs to just do what his dharma is, and his dharma is a warrior. Arjuna's innate quality is a warrior, so he should fulfill his quality. No matter who he is fighting, he needs to lean into that, because what this is not becoming a hero. It's about dissolving the one who would be a hero. Do you see? Arjuna was confused as whether he should fight or not fight. And Krishna comes along and says, forget all that. That's a game of the jiva, of the persona system, the ego. It's your ego fighting the will of Vishnu here, the will of Vishnu, a representation of Brahman, the ultimate reality. You're fighting that. But your role here is a warrior, Now, it's not to depict Arjuna as the great hero or superhero in the Bhagavad Gita. It's a story about the dissolution of identity. It's not based on individualism. It's based on the dissolution of the self and the realization that you are Brahman. Do you see the difference here? Hollywood is geared towards individualism, where Eastern spirituality is geared towards the dissolution of the self. And so this is another problem with consuming too much Hollywood, especially because it's going to reinforce in you individualism. It's going to reinforce in you identity. You're going to want to be like this person or that person. You're going to try and emulate the actors and actresses. This is the wrong way to go about it. And so the ways that we can avoid this is to just stop watching and consuming this entertainment altogether. Especially if you're sincere about your spiritual practice. You need to get rid of this urge to watch Hollywood or Bollywood or 1,000 TV shows. And you have to inquire into the nature of your mind. Why am I so agitated and anxious about watching this show? You need to analyze this, right? Because it's our agitation, this restlessness that we have, which is the result of too much distraction, too much activity. Our mind can't handle it, and we feel it in our psychosomatic organism. And this restlessness is something we have to get over. And we see this often with the phone, right? People fidgeting with their phone all the time. And I say to people, especially in my new book coming up, Spiritual Freedom in the Digital Age, stop fidgeting. You're an adult. And so if you're sincere about your spiritual practice, you have to get rid of this restlessness. And Hollywood and TV shows and Bollywood and so forth and so on, the entertainment industry in general, only contribute to you having more restlessness and no equanimity. And your mind will be wound up in stories and imagination that don't exist. And so, as I said, the way to avoid this is to just stop consuming this knowledge and instead consume the path of the East and consume the great knowledge of the Eastern spiritual traditions. And then you'll begin to frame reality from that perspective as opposed to framing the reality through Hollywood or Bollywood's lens. And so, Anna, thank you for that question. It's a great reminder for all of us to come back to our center and to avoid distractions, especially the greatest distraction at the moment, which is entertainment. And unfortunately, entertainment has become our culture without any depth. And so we need to reclaim our culture. And in reclaiming our culture, we come back to the great traditional knowledge that has been passed down from generation to generation to generation and didn't just appear as a random phenomenon as the entertainment industry has. So we need to come back into alignment with that cultural evolution and in alignment with those traditions. So then we can overcome this restlessness to realize who we truly are. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.